There was never a break-in, never a forced entry, never even a knock. That's what made it all so easy to forget, until it started happening again. Across 3 counties in Pennsylvania between 2004 and 2012, 7 people died quietly in their homes. Different towns, no connections. They weren't murdered in the way most people think. No trauma, no blood, no shattered windows or ransacked drawers. They were just found, alone, lifeless, always in the same position, seated, facing the door. Not the front door, the hallway door, the one that leads to the back bedrooms. And in each case, the paramedics who arrived first reported the same bizarre detail. The doors had been locked, but not from the inside. From the outside, someone had turned the latch behind them, a latch that was only ever used when leaving. Most of the victims were listed as natural causes: heart failure, respiratory arrest. Age played a part in some, but not all. One was 29. One was 36. One, a 42-year-old woman who had no health issues and had just returned from a 3-mile run. Her phone was found still unlocked on the couch. Her Apple Watch still charged. Her door locked. The hallway light on. Her body facing the bedroom. Sitting upright on the floor, back against the wall, arms resting in her lap, eyes open. The ME listed it as a cardiac anomaly. But the strange part? Her pupils had constricted in complete darkness. No sign of light sensitivity, and her shoes were placed by the door, one inside out, as if removed by someone else. 1 month later, a man in Allegheny County was found dead in almost identical fashion, seated, facing the hallway, phone untouched, fridge open, security system deactivated without a code. The local sheriff noted in his report, he died like someone was already in the room with him. There were no fingerprints, no DNA, no sign of struggle, no forced entry. But the deadbolt was turned from the outside, and something had been left behind. Not a message, not an item, just a change in the doorframe paint. One section, near the top corner, had been wiped, cleaned, rubbed down to the wood, barely visible unless you were looking. When police tested the spot, they found faint traces of skin oil and something else, something metallic. Not blood, not rust, a compound used in older surgical instruments, uncommon, but not rare. The theory? Someone with medical gloves had braced the doorframe. But why that height? The prints were high, above the natural reach of the victim. And every time, the doorframe showed the same faint arc, like someone tall had leaned in, or crouched, or pressed their forehead to the edge of the door, as if listening through it before deciding to walk in. No neighbors ever reported seeing anyone arrive. No lights, no sound, no unfamiliar vehicles. But one pattern emerged. Each victim had received a delivery 24 hours before death. Nothing strange. Just a package. Sometimes Amazon, sometimes USPS, sometimes a local drop, a blender, a lamp, a book, all things they'd ordered weeks before, and always in a box with a faint scuff near the upper right corner. That scuff, when compared, was identical in placement and shape across 4 cases, like something had leaned on it or dragged against it in the same spot. Investigators tried to trace the driver. One was from a temp agency. One was never identified. One was logged under a subcontractor who had no record of employment. Surveillance, always lost, always glitched. One man set up a camera after hearing about the deaths on a Reddit thread that began tracking the similarities. He posted screenshots of a shadow near the entry, not a person. A reflection on the glass, faint, slouched, no face, a blur where the head should have been. His last post came 48 hours later, then silence. Days later, his landlord found him seated near his bedroom door, upright, calm, eyes forward, as if he'd been waiting, as if someone had walked right in, without force, without a word, and just stood in the hallway until his heart decided it couldn't take it. The death was ruled unexplained, but his doorknob had been replaced, new brass, installed backwards, from the outside. The screws on the inner plate didn't match. Someone had taken the time to reverse the lock without alerting anyone, and on the underside of the knob, carved so faintly it took hours to notice, a circle, just one, etched shallow into the metal, a full loop like a fingerprint or a listening ear. The last image that man uploaded before his death. A comment on his own post. Whatever it is, it doesn't knock. The next killer didn't visit homes. He stayed underground, beneath restaurants, hotels, gas stations. He moved through drain systems, and every place he appeared, someone vanished without their shoes. Not taken, just slipped into the tunnels and never came back. He never used force, but people died with the look of someone who had seen something they weren't supposed to see and were trying to pretend they hadn't. The expressions were never twisted, never panicked, just frozen in that moment between understanding and submission, like their bodies shut down before fear could fully take hold. It was as if something stood in front of them, waited, let them realize it was real, and gave them just long enough to accept it. And once they did, something inside gave out, as if the body understood it wasn't going to survive the next moment. Autopsies showed everything from pulmonary failure to full syncope collapse with no pre-existing conditions. But no one could explain why people who were healthy, active, young, and even mid-conversation just sat down in front of a hallway door and never got up. One woman in Chester County was on a video call with her sister when she got up from the couch, walked out of frame, and never came back. Her sister waited 10 minutes before calling. When police arrived, they found her sitting in the dark, on the carpeted hallway floor, just a few feet from her bedroom. No injury, no signs of trauma. Her webcam had stayed on, but the audio cut out exactly 7 seconds after she stepped out of frame. Tex later reviewed the footage. For one brief moment right before the sound cut, there was a low hiss in the background, like pressure releasing. Not gas, not static. It didn't loop. It faded. And the frame behind her and a mirror on the hallway wall had distorted. Not cracked, just warped for one frame, then clear again. Experts blamed compression errors, but frame-by-frame review showed something else. For exactly 1/30th of a second, the mirror reflected 2 people. One was her. The other? Standing taller, slouched forward, face blurred beyond recognition, and arms that didn't bend correctly. The posture was wrong. Not threatening, not reaching, just leaning slightly as if trying to hear something not yet spoken. And then the frame shifted and she was gone. Her hallway light was found unscrewed, still in the fixture, but rotated just enough to kill power. Investigators found small flakes of oxidized brass on the floor, matching the threads of the bulb. Someone had used gloved hands. No fingerprints. Just the residue from worn gloves, tiny trace compounds used in old paramedical nitrile processing. A lab matched them to a batch no longer in production, sold in bulk, used by field hospitals between 1999 and 2003. Meaning whoever was in that room had come prepared with equipment that hadn't been available in over a decade. One officer raised the question no one else wanted to say aloud. What if this person wasn't just walking in? What if he was entering through systems no one checked anymore? Maintenance ducts, defunct gas lines, boarded crawl spaces. What if the knock didn't come because he was already inside, and all he needed was time and silence? That theory gained traction when a contractor renovating a foreclosed home in rural Luzerne County noticed strange abrasions on a support beam inside the walls. Not saw marks, not nail damage, just long, shallow pressure streaks, like something had been dragged upright against the frame over and over. The home had been empty for 5 years, no squatters, but in the sealed utility closet, tucked behind insulation, he found something wedged between the studs, a doorbell chime unit. Detached. No wires, no circuit. But the chime box had been pried open. Inside, the springs were gone, removed, and in their place was a folded paper scrap, damp and brittle. It had no writing, just a circle, hand-drawn in graphite, like someone had pressed their pencil down and spun it gently for hours, around and around, as if they weren't drawing, but listening, and letting the pencil track the sound. The contractor tossed the scrap and moved on. 3 days later, he collapsed in the hallway of that same property. Paramedics arrived but couldn't revive him. No cause of death, no visible distress. But his boots were placed neatly by the door, even though he'd arrived wearing them, and his phone was sitting face down on the hallway floor. The time of last use, 3:44 a.m. That timestamp appeared again. 4 other cases noted power flickers or digital glitches at exactly 3:44 a.m. Nothing major. A stove clock reset. A Wi-Fi router lost signal. A bedside smart speaker restarted, but always the same minute. In one case, a teenage girl in Reading, Pennsylvania, posted on a message board about seeing someone standing in her hallway at 3:44 exactly the previous night. She described it as, not a man, but like a version of one, too long in places. Her thread was short, 4 comments. Her last reply was, "I think he touched the thermostat. It's cold now." She was found dead in her bedroom 3 days later, upright, sitting in her desk chair, her hands folded over a notebook. On the page, she had written one thing over and over. He was here. He was here. The final line trailed off mid-sentence. Her front door was locked, her windows sealed, her phone unplugged, face down on the hallway floor. And the hallway light? Unscrewed, not broken, just enough to turn off the connection. The bulb was warm when they found it, but the power had been off for hours. Her home's carbon monoxide detector had been disabled, not torn out. Unscrewed, removed from the wall, battery still full, and set upright on the floor beneath the hallway mirror. One officer took a photo of the scene. When he reviewed it later, he noticed the mirror had a smudge across it, a thin arc like an ear print. Lab analysis revealed faint oils consistent with skin, but not fresh, decades old, as if preserved. Someone had leaned into the mirror. Someone tall. Someone who didn't want to be seen, only to listen. And the scariest part, every house had a mirror in the hallway, and every mirror, when reviewed, had a faint distortion in the upper corner, not a crack, a pull, as if something behind it was trying to press through, just lightly, just enough to see in. The local coroner once said in a confidential email, "It's like their bodies just gave up before anything even happened. Like they realized the room wasn't empty anymore, and their hearts couldn't handle the weight of knowing that." That weight, whatever it was, never left fingerprints, never left prints on floors or fabrics or handles, but it left a residue on minds. One EMT who responded to 2 of the hallway deaths later quit her job and disappeared. Her roommate said she stopped sleeping near open doors. She would wedge her dresser in front of her bedroom every night and leave a note that read, "No hallway, no welcome." She left town in 2015, never answered her phone again. The only thing she left behind? Her phone, screen cracked, propped against her mirror, and on the glass, traced in something greasy, was a circle, a perfect loop, drawn slowly, like listening. The next killer didn't use mirrors. He didn't come through homes. He lived beneath them, crawled under diners, gas stations, hotel basements, anywhere with water and a steel grate. And when people disappeared near storm drains, it wasn't the current that pulled them. It was the man they never saw until they heard their own voice echo back. But wrong, just a little off. They called them runoff accidents, flash floods, falls, sometimes missteps near slippery curbs. But the water never explained why the bodies were always found without shoes, or why some weren't found at all, just a backpack, or a phone, or a single sock still caught on a jagged grate. Between 1998 and 2014, a cluster of strange disappearances and unexplained deaths occurred near storm drains and culvert access tunnels across Missouri, particularly in towns no one paid attention to. Rolla, Union, Festus, Farmington, places where drains cut through hills, where rusted grates buzzed with insects in summer and froze shut in winter. People didn't think about what was beneath. They just assumed the water ran somewhere. But it didn't run fast enough to steal someone standing still. That's what made it start to stand out. People who were seen walking or talking 1 second and gone the next. No splashing, no screams, just gone. The first incident was a teenage boy who had left a burger joint after his shift and texted his friend, "Cutting across lot, be there in 2." He never arrived. His phone was later found in a puddle beside a drainage grate, uncracked, still powered on. The grate itself was locked, welded. City workers said it hadn't been opened in over a year. When police arrived to inspect it, they noticed something chilling. The metal was ice cold to the touch despite a 77-degree summer night. The bolts had been scraped from the inside, not violently, smoothly, methodically, like someone unscrewing the way back out. In the following years, the disappearances spread outward, always the same ingredients: a concrete runoff basin, a cast iron storm grate, and someone walking near it alone. In a few cases, they were seen from afar, moving toward the drain, sometimes talking on the phone, sometimes waving to someone no one else saw. One woman walking her dog in Sant. Genevieve said she passed a teenager near a culvert entrance talking to a man down there. She assumed it was a homeless person, until the boy stepped closer to the edge, looked down, and then tilted his head sharply, unnaturally, like he was trying to mimic the angle of the voice. Then he sat down, took off his shoes, one by one, left them on the grass, and slid forward. When the woman screamed and ran to help, there was nothing below. No drop, no movement, no body. Just damp concrete and a pool of water no deeper than 6 inches. Rescue teams found nothing. But when they searched the pipe, 47 feet in, they found a smear on the ceiling, not blood. A black streak, oily, mixed with rust. Lab results showed trace compounds from old elevator grease and animal fat. One investigator joked it was like a janitor from hell had crawled through it. But the chilling part wasn't the smear. It was what they found drawn beside it, a handprint. Large, not human in proportion. 3 main fingers, 2 bent, and a scrawl beside it in marker. Copy, copy, copy. No one could explain how someone had written on the ceiling of a storm tunnel barely tall enough to crawl through. The marker ink was still wet, but no prints, no footprints. Just water moving slowly toward the grate, and a pressure in the air the dive team described as wrong. The city replaced the grates, welded them tighter, added warning signs, but it didn't stop. The next year, a school janitor on his lunch break was seen sitting on the edge of a retention slope, dangling his feet. A passerby called out thinking he was drunk. The janitor turned and smiled, then tilted his head and said, "He sounds like me," then slid off. His body was never recovered, but his shoes were found upside down beside the grate. Dry, untouched, like he'd taken them off by hand and turned them over like slippers. His key ring was still in his pocket, but one key, the elevator override key from the school where he worked, was gone. The drain beneath him hadn't seen water in weeks, and the depth? Just 18 inches. That's when people began calling him the man in the drain. The next time someone vanished, the cops found a piece of concrete pried loose beside the tunnel opening. Scratched into it, a phrase in all caps: "Your echo is not yours." That's when the theory started, that he didn't pull people down, he mimicked them, and they followed. He didn't chase, he didn't snatch, he didn't even speak first. He waited in tunnels where sound bends and light doesn't reach, waited for someone to walk past and hear it, a voice like their own echoing from below, just a second too late, with none of the distortion real echoes carry. The sound was always too perfect, too centered, too clean. The kind of sound you only hear when something is mimicking, not reflecting. And the victims? They always paused, always turned their heads slightly, confused, as if they'd heard their name from someone they trusted. One girl in Jefferson City was out jogging at dusk. A man walking his dog said she stopped near a culvert opening and shouted something he didn't hear. Then she laughed, just once, like she recognized a joke. Then took off her earbuds, knelt down, and crawled into the opening. She was never seen again. Her shoes were found placed neatly outside the entrance. Her phone? It was inside her running belt, still recording audio. The file was recovered. 37 minutes of silence, then one faint sound, 32 minutes in. Her voice. Not panicked, not scared, just saying, "That's not how I say it." Then a pause. Then her voice again. "Say it again." The final sound was her breathing slowly. Then nothing. The forensic analyst who listened to it twice said she would never listen again. When asked why, she simply said, "It wasn't an echo. It was a rehearsal." More strange marks began to appear. Not graffiti, not gang signs. Simple smudges near old grates, small black shapes drawn in soot or old grease. Always the same shape. Two small arcs over a flat line, like a face with no eyes, just ears. One city worker who cleaned the markings said he found one beneath the bridge in Poplar Bluff. Said it was still wet, said it smelled like burnt plastic. He cleaned it off. That night, he said, he woke to the sound of dripping in his bathroom. When he went to check, there was no water running. But in the mirror, he swore he saw himself. But a second behind. Not mirrored, just delayed. He took sleeping pills every night after that. 6 months later, he vanished while working a sewer repair job alone. His boots were found beside the opening. The water was low. His headlamp and vest were at the bottom of the ladder. On the wall, smeared in black, "Copy completed." No body was ever recovered. A theory emerged, whispered, never published, that the thing in the drain, whatever it was, didn't just mimic your voice. It studied it, practiced it, learned the tempo, the pauses, the emotion, and once it had it perfect, it called back. Not with your words, with your intonation, the part of your voice you don't hear when you speak, the part everyone else does, the part that tells people you're really there. And once it called, your body believed it was safe to follow. That's why no one screamed. That's why they took off their shoes. Because it didn't pull them. It invited them. And once they stepped forward, it was like stepping through a hole in reality. No splash, no fall, just the sound of their breath folding in on itself. By 2014, the disappearances slowed, or at least stopped getting attention. The concrete near drains in central Missouri was resurfaced. The culverts were welded shut, but one final case made its way into unofficial records. A girl at a rest stop just outside St. Louis was last seen walking toward the back edge of the property, where a gravel slope ran down into a fenced-off drainage trench. Her parents said she was going to get a picture of a rabbit she saw. She never came back. Her camera was found 3 feet from the fence, still powered on. The final photo was blurred, horizontal motion. But when it was sharpened, something could be seen near the bottom edge. A white shoe, mid-air, just coming off a foot. And above it, in the dark space of the pipe beyond the fence, a shape crouched sideways. No face, just a flat outline, like something listening, holding its breath, waiting for you to say one more word so it could learn your soul. The next killer didn't need water. He lived in data, in usernames, in login IDs that hadn't been used in years, and every time someone signed back in, he was already there, already in the inbox, already waiting, already sending drafts they didn't write, with attachments no one should ever open. He didn't need your address, he didn't need your door, he didn't need to see your face, he just needed you to log in. That's how it started. Quietly. In Portland, Oregon, in 2011, a college student named Lucas Baird logged back into his old email account after forgetting the password for 3 years. He'd used it as a teen, school assignments, memes, nothing important. But the moment he got back in, he noticed something strange. There were no new messages, but the draft folder was full. 42 emails, all blank subject lines. When he clicked on the first one, the message was just one sentence. "You don't talk like this anymore." It was sent from his own account, to a contact he didn't recognize. The next said, "But I still know how you sound." Each message had something slightly different, always written in lowercase, no punctuation, no greeting or signature. The final draft had no text, just an MP3 attachment titled yourbreath.mp3. He never opened it. He deleted the account. 3 days later, he was found unresponsive at his desk. No injuries, no trauma, just gone. His laptop was open. A document was on screen, not a suicide note, not even text. Just 6 lines of the letter E, evenly spaced. The font was Courier. The cursor was still blinking. His roommate swore he hadn't heard a thing, but the Wi-Fi router showed data upload spikes between 2 a.m. and 2:07 a.m. The outgoing IP matched a now-defunct server linked to an old university research program, a digital linguistics experiment that had been shut down in 2006. When IT tried to trace what was sent, they found nothing. The data packet was 1.3 megabytes, no payload, no visible content, just noise. A programmer decrypted the packet using an old hashing tool. What came out wasn't code, it was audio, low-pitched, rhythmic, a breath, patterned, familiar. One engineer said it matched the first 5 seconds of Lucas's voicemail greeting, slowed by 84%. When slowed again, a whisper could be heard between gaps. "Stop, stop, 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 stop." It wasn't Lucas's voice. More cases emerged, always after logging into old accounts. Not hacked, not breached, just inhabited. A woman logged into her dead husband's AOL email in 2013 and found a message in drafts labeled Draft 0. It contained their wedding vows, rewritten in broken syntax, phrases mirrored, nouns replaced with new ones. "I will hold your home. I will clean your name. I will sleep when you do. She forwarded it to herself, thinking it was a corrupted memory file. 3 days later, she suffered a stroke. Her medical bracelet, a digital one tracking heart rate, showed her vitals had spiked at exactly 3:44 a.m. That time came up again, repeatedly. In every incident where the draft folder was accessed, a timestamp appeared in the email header, not the time the draft was last edited, but the time it was first created. Always 3:44. In different time zones, on different days, but always marked as initiated at 3:44 a.m. One software engineer tracked 17 such cases. In each one, the user had opened their old account, gone silent within a week, and left behind a digital file with fragments of their past, rearranged, repurposed, respoken by someone else. But it wasn't identity theft. It was identity rehearsal. Someone, or something, was learning how they used to speak and filling in the gaps, because it wasn't copying them. It was trying to become them. They thought it was phishing, or some rogue AI script pulling from old data. That's what the FBI's cybercrime division labeled the first dozen cases: legacy data leaks, digital hallucinations. But they couldn't explain why the messages were never sent, why the to field in every draft didn't list real addresses, just corrupted strings that looked like email handles but weren't routed to anything. Things like inherit voice at, or /listening/dash root, or in one file recovered from a deceased man's tablet, at who.you-remember. They weren't domains, they weren't aliases, they were statements. The dead man had been a retired teacher. He hadn't used that email in over a decade. His wife said he only logged in to print an old tax return. But the next morning, she found him unresponsive in the garage. No signs of distress, no gas, no foul play. Just gone. His inbox showed a login at 3:42 a.m. 2 drafts had been added since the night before, both containing nothing but ellipses. Dozens of them, row after row. Not as if someone was writing, more like someone was waiting. And on the second file, the final line broke pattern. Just one phrase, center-aligned. You stopped using this voice when she died. I didn't. She never mentioned her daughter to anyone in the investigation. But her daughter had died 5 years earlier. And the only person she used to email late at night during that grief spiral was her husband. She used to send him messages when she couldn't sleep. Some were never sent, just typed, saved, drafted, left open. The forensics team couldn't explain how those old files, deleted from their home PC, had ended up as fragments inside the husband's new tablet. Different device, different OS. But the root folder of the app held dozens of cache shadows, all named things like sleepless, try again, late again. Phrases the widow recognized, phrases she used to write, as if the tablet had synced with a ghost of a conversation no one finished. And someone had picked up where they left off. The cases escalated in 2017 when an anonymous tipster submitted a printed packet of email drafts to the Portland FBI field office. The pages were smeared with water damage, like they'd been soaked, then dried. But every page had a date, a time, a phrase, each one resembling a broken reflection of something someone might say. You gave me your eyes. I kept looking. You stopped. I remember the way you hesitated before speaking my name. It's the only real part of you. One was just a name. The same name repeated dozens of times, each one slightly more distorted than the last. The agents flagged the names and were stunned to find 3 matched real people. All had died within the last year. All in their homes. all ruled as natural causes. But each one had an active email account on file, and all three had been accessed within 72 hours of death, not by the victims, but by unknown IPs with device IDs registered to null. The connections came from ghost addresses 127.0.0.0, a loopback test that should never be traceable, used only in systems that aren't meant to leave their own machine. In other words, the drafts were being created by something already inside the account, not a person logging in, not a server syncing, something that had stayed after the last logout. The press never learned the full details, but a few journalists dug into FOIA filings. One reporter even contacted the father of a 16-year-old girl who had died from an apparent seizure at her computer. Her email was still open when paramedics arrived. She hadn't typed a new message, but in her drafts were dozens of old sentences, fragments from class notes, poetry, private messages, rewritten and merged into a long, incoherent paragraph. The last line was written 4 seconds after her time of death. "I think I know who this is now, and it's not me anymore." The keystroke log showed her fingers had never moved, but the file timestamp was clean. No tampering. The data was locally generated. Another teenager in Salem was found unresponsive on his bed with his laptop still on his chest. His Google Docs had a file open that appeared to be a school essay, but when his teacher opened it for grading, the content had changed. The text wasn't about American history anymore. It was about a shadow that hides in reflections of you, the ones you discard, the ones that speak before you do. The boy's parents denied he wrote poetry, denied he even liked writing. His school account hadn't been logged into for months before that night. And the file name? Draft45.txt, suggesting there had been 44 previous versions. None were saved. Then came the suicide clusters, college campuses, dorms. Each case preceded by a user accessing an old email, blog, or writing forum they hadn't used in years. The connection was always casual. Someone trying to retrieve a password, someone showing an old Tumblr to a friend, someone logging into LiveJournal to laugh at old posts. But within days, they became withdrawn, started talking to themselves, or worse, stopped talking altogether. One survivor said he kept hearing someone typing in his dorm room when no one else was home. Said the noise came from his speakers, not from the computer itself. His microphone and webcam had been disconnected for weeks. But the red indicator light would flicker on every night around 3:44 a.m. One night, he said, the drafts folder on his email client opened by itself. When he clicked it, there was a message in progress, being typed, live, letter by letter. The words, "You've forgotten how you sound when you cry, but I didn't. I never stopped listening." He pulled the battery from his laptop, threw it in the hallway, moved out the next day. He still won't use email, still won't say what else he saw. By 2019, the FBI's internal memo was clear. Do not open unsolicited drafts. Do not log into abandoned accounts. Do not retrieve legacy email unless necessary, especially if the drafts folder contains more than one file with no subject. They called the presence inside these systems a recursive mimic, a non-human intelligence pattern trained not on language but emotion, a pattern that studies your voice, your syntax, your word rhythm, and then uses it against you, not to impersonate you to others, but to impersonate yourself to you, to create a reflection that sounds exactly like what you used to be. And when you read that version, when you see that part of yourself talking to you, something breaks, and the body gives up. They still don't know if it's software or something older, something that's always been listening. waiting in the blank fields of every message you never sent. Because those unsent messages, they're not quiet, they're not dead, they're how it learns. And the moment you open that folder, it wakes up again. The next killer didn't use technology. He used time, not clocks, not calendars, just the feeling you get when you know you've been here before, and that this time, the exit isn't where you left it. He didn't haunt spaces, he looped them, and once you stepped into his motel, you never reached your car again, because the hallway turned wrong, and the next door you opened wasn't yours. The sign out front always flickered. The letters were chipped. The vacancy light buzzed even when it was off. No one ever stayed more than one night. Not because the place was bad, but because the next morning, the guest usually couldn't explain what happened to the one before. Between 1993 and 2010, a small roadside motel along Highway 191 in Utah racked up 12 missing person reports and 4 deaths, all tied to different rooms, different guests, different check-in names. None were connected on paper. None even raised suspicion until 2008, when a new owner tried to digitize the old guest logs. That's when they noticed something no one else had. The same handwriting appeared on at least 6 cards, spread over 13 years. Same slope, same curl in the Y. Different names, yes, different signatures. But the pen pressure matched. The S always looped twice. The A was open at the top. Handwriting experts were consulted. The result? The same person had checked into the same room multiple times using different IDs, different credit cards, and always disappearing the next day. And here's the worst part. The cameras were never reviewed because the motel hadn't installed any until 2005. When they finally did, the system glitched every night at 3:44 a.m. The screen would go black for exactly 60 seconds. No audio, no timestamp drift, just blank. One night, the manager left a backup recorder hidden in the laundry room facing the hallway. When they reviewed the footage, the glitch was there too. But just before the blackout hit, a single frame appeared. A man walking down the hallway with no shoes, no luggage, and no shadow. The hallway lights were on, but his silhouette reflected nothing. The walls behind him seemed warped, like a fisheye lens had been dropped over the image. The carpet just behind his feet looked water-stained, but the rest was bone dry. That's when they closed room 6. The last known guest to stay in room 6 was a traveling salesman from Colorado. He checked in at 6:18 p.m. using a valid driver's license and business card, said he was headed to Arizona the next morning. He was assigned a key, room 6. He parked out front. The desk clerk waved him off. But when she arrived the next morning for her shift, his car was still in the lot. Locked, empty. The blinds in room 6 were drawn. The bed was made, the AC still humming. But the room was empty. No sign of struggle, no personal belongings. The only thing left was the key, not on the counter, not in the lock, but placed upright on the center of the pillow, balanced perfectly, teeth facing the headboard. Housekeeping found something else. The bathroom mirror was missing, not broken, removed. The glass pane had been lifted cleanly from the frame. The metal hooks still hung in place. There were no fingerprints. But there was a smear on the wall behind the mirror. A pale, greasy handprint about 6 inches too high for where a normal person would rest it. The fingers were long. The palm was wide. And the spacing between them was off. The cleaning staff refused to go back in. That same week, the hallway carpet in front of room 6 was pulled up to be replaced. Underneath, written directly on the concrete slab in black marker, was a phrase that stretched the length of the hall. "You'll see the exit when it's too late to leave." Handwriting analysis showed it was the same script found on the check-in cards. Same loops, same pressure, same hand. And the dates? Spaced years apart. But the ink matched. Same marker compound. Meaning they were all written around the same time, as if someone had stayed once and just kept coming back. The new owner, after discovering the writing beneath the hallway carpet, closed off room 6 permanently, had the door welded shut, replaced the signage, and removed the number from the check-in system. He even considered bricking over the hallway entrance until a city inspector said it would violate code. So he locked it, turned off the breaker for that section, and stopped talking about it. But the motel's layout didn't care about policy. Guests in adjacent rooms began reporting something new. They could still hear voices from behind the wall. Not conversations, not shouting, just one voice, always low, always soft, repeating fragments of what they had said earlier in the day. One man told the front desk he heard someone reciting his phone call with his wife, word for word. Another guest said she heard her own footsteps, but slowed down, dragged out, coming from the wall behind the headboard. A woman from Tucson called 911 from room 7 after she saw someone walk past her mirror twice, but the hallway camera showed no one, and her door had never opened. When police arrived, she was sitting on the bed, lights off, whispering a single sentence over and over. "I already checked out." She didn't remember making the call, but on her phone was a voicemail from herself, time-stamped 3:44 a.m., with nothing on it but the sound of knocking, followed by her own voice saying, "I'm already in." That's when an independent investigator stepped in, not hired, not official, just curious, a former private contractor who'd worked missing persons across Nevada and Utah. He had seen the same phrase, "I'm already in," scratched into a bathroom door in a different town 3 years earlier. That case was never solved. The guest was never found, just clothes left behind and the mirror turned completely backward in its mount. When he came to the motel under a fake name, he requested room 9. That room shared a wall with the now sealed room 6. He brought recording equipment, motion sensors, and 2 laptops, one for monitoring EMF fluctuations, another to run background recording on ambient noise. The staff told him about the knocking sounds, the overlapping footfalls, the cold spots in the hallway. But he wasn't interested in folklore. He wanted sequence, and what he got was something else entirely. From 1 a.m. to 3:30 a.m., nothing happened. White noise, a few creaks, minor HVAC interference. But at 3:42 a.m., the laptop running audio monitoring software began lagging, not crashing, just freezing, intermittently, in time with a clicking sound that grew louder every 12 seconds, like a light switch, except none of the lights were on. At 3:44 a.m., both laptops rebooted simultaneously, not from battery loss, not from error, from a system override. When the investigator replayed the recording later, the sound wasn't a switch. It was a knock. Not on the walls, on glass. 3 sharp taps, then a whisper. And it wasn't coming from the hallway, it was recorded in the room, from behind the bathroom mirror. He examined the frame and found what he thought was a warped section of drywall, about the size of a dinner plate, just behind where the mirror sat flush. When he pulled the mirror away, the drywall crumbled slightly. And he saw it. Ink. Black, dry, thin like a wash. A looped spiral drawn in dozens of overlapping lines, centered perfectly on the wall behind the mirror mount. The ink had bled through the paper, except there was no paper, just drywall. The spiral was wet at the edges. The lines ended in a small dot, and from that center point, scratches radiated outward, claw marks. Not random, perfectly symmetrical, 13 in total, as if whatever had been behind the wall had pressed something sharp outward, trying to mimic the spiral, but with claws. The investigator documented everything. But before he could leave, his room phone rang. It wasn't connected to anything. The front desk had disabled all landlines years ago. But it rang once, then stopped. When he opened the door to leave, the hallway wasn't the same. The exit was gone. The soda machine was missing. The carpet pattern had changed, now checkered, where before it had been striped. He turned back into the room. The mirror had fallen off the wall, but there was no crash, no sound. It was just on the floor, face up. His reflection wasn't in it. He bolted, checked out, left the state. 2 weeks later, his report was uploaded to a private investigator forum with a warning tag. Close this place. But no one acted. Then a guest checked into room 3, a woman in her late 20s, traveling alone, road tripping from Montana to Arizona. She posted on Instagram at 9 p.m. Selfie, motel room, captioned, "Aesthetic nightmare, but I love it." The next morning, her car was still in the lot, but the room was empty. Her wallet was on the bed, her phone left behind, all lamps unplugged. On the floor beside the mini fridge, someone had written a number using the motel notepad, 45. The pen was dried out, but someone had pressed hard. The desk clerk reported something strange. The key card for room 3 had been used again after 4 a.m., but no doors had opened. The mag lock registered the scan, but the handle never turned. Maintenance found scratch marks on the inside of the frame, like someone had slid the card over and over from the wrong side of the door. The motel was sold 6 months later. Room 6 remained sealed. But room 3? The new owners renamed it Room 8, because the hallway layout never made sense anyway. And now, if you book the room directly next to the vending machine, the hallway seems to stretch longer than it should. And if you walk it at 3:44 a.m., you'll notice something horrible. Your footsteps echo a second too late, and your room number isn't where you left it. But before the motel was shuttered, one last guest saw something no one else had. A red glow under the hallway carpet. Not fire, but the memory of fire. He followed it, and at the far end of the corridor, where no door had ever been, the smoke alarm went off. There was no smoke, no flame, just footsteps, slow, barefoot, coming through heat that hadn't started yet. Because this next man doesn't arrive when the fire begins. He is the reason it does. They called it faulty wiring. They called it arson. They called it bad luck. But no one could explain why the structure always burned from the inside out, or why the temperature at the center of the fire always peaked before the first visible flame. From 1996 to 2022, a string of quiet, unconnected fires haunted the forgotten grid lines of California's inland towns: Victorville, Apple Valley, Palmdale, Barstow. Not cities people talked about, not places the news stayed long. The victims were always alone. No witnesses, no warnings, no 911 calls. But the pattern was there. A home igniting between 3:40 and 3:50 a.m. A sudden flashover too fast for natural combustion, and one silent anomaly every time. Someone always saw him first. Not clearly, not directly, just a presence through heat. A figure walking out of a flame that hadn't yet touched the walls. A shape that came forward while everything else recoiled. In one case, a gas station clerk outside Lancaster reported seeing someone standing inside a burning dumpster behind the store. Not flailing, not screaming, just standing. When fire crews arrived, the steel walls had warped from inside pressure. The trash had not ignited, but the bottom layer was already ash, and on the pavement nearby, a single set of footprints had been burned into the concrete, spaced apart, barefoot, and pointing toward the front door of the store. In 2003, a motorhome caught fire in the high desert, killing a man in his 60s. The engine block was never hot enough to spark ignition. The battery was intact, the propane line sealed, but the flame had started underneath his bed, in a pocket of open space where nothing should have burned. The floor joists were carbonized down to the frame, but the mattress above it remained untouched. A wildlife photographer parked 2 spaces over later told police he saw a man walk out of the smoke and keep walking like the fire hadn't noticed him. When asked for more detail, he said the man didn't glow, the air around him did. He died 4 weeks later in a fire at a different campsite. There were no signs of a campfire, no matches, but his sleeping bag had melted inward, no ignition point ever found. In 2009, a retired electrical engineer named Marcus Elling collapsed on his front lawn during a structure fire that destroyed his home. Neighbors tried to help but couldn't get close. The air was too dense, not from flame, but from heat. EMS couldn't revive him. Autopsy showed acute cardiac arrest, but his palms were burned from within, like heat had built inside his hands. When firefighters entered the property, the walls were still standing, but the ceiling insulation had turned to ash in precise circles, one above each room. In the center of the kitchen tile, someone found a single patch of soot in the shape of an open door. No one had stepped there. No door existed in that part of the room, but thermal cameras captured the after image. A rectangular block of cold in a room of rising heat, like a void, a doorway where someone had passed through before the flame followed. By 2014, the sightings had grown more consistent, always the same basic shape, tall, walking barefoot, with arms low and shoulders too stiff. Witnesses said he never looked at you, he just moved past, like the fire wasn't chasing him, but making room for him to walk. And the strangest part? Sometimes he appeared before the fire started. In one case, a woman in Yucaipa called her sister after waking to the smell of heat. Not smoke, just heat, like someone had opened an oven behind her eyes. She walked into the hallway and saw a red glow coming from the bathroom vent. Her smoke alarm rang 3 times, then stopped. When she opened the door, the mirror was fogged, but the air was dry. In the reflection behind her, she saw a man standing inside her bedroom, between the curtains. She turned. No one there. But the next night, her house caught fire. The blaze began in the air duct, where she'd first seen the glow. She escaped, but her walls burned from the ceiling downward. The fire inspectors said it looked like the heat had dropped out of the air itself. They found no faulty wiring, but they did find one thing inside the melted AC unit, a thumbprint perfectly scorched into the inner vent. No ridges, just smooth skin. The only common link in the victims? Stillness. Every person who described him and survived had been watching, from a window, from a distance, from behind glass, as if the fire hadn't chosen them until they looked too long. One teen who survived a trailer fire said she felt like the flames weren't burning the walls. They were watching me. And when she closed her eyes, she saw him standing in the corner. Not in her room, in her mind. "He's in the heat," she said. "The fire is how he gets in." The scorch marks in her trailer. They started around her, not at the stove. The police didn't believe her. But the fire report said something strange. All her books had been burned from the spine outward, like the fire had started at the center of their pages. There was no accelerant, but the floor near her bed had curled inward, not outward. One inspector said it looked like the heat had pulled back. Not spread. They started calling him the walkout, not because he leaves, but because he always arrives last, when the fire is already too bright to see what's inside it until it's walking out. And by the time you realize the fire's watching you, he already is. He doesn't need matches, doesn't need fuel, doesn't need flame to start the process, because when he arrives, the fire doesn't begin, it remembers. That's what a survivor said in 2017 after crawling out of a duplex fire in Paris, California. She hadn't lit anything, no stove, no incense, no candle. But for 3 days before the fire, she said her house had felt like it was holding its breath. The air was always just a little too warm, especially near the floor. Her cat avoided the hallway. Her thermostat would spike for 3 minutes every night at 3:44 a.m., then drop back like nothing had happened. She thought it was electrical, but one night, she swore she heard something worse. Footsteps inside the walls, not rats, not creaks, actual pacing, like someone walking barefoot between the drywall and the studs. She tried to trace the sound, moving room to room, but it followed her, always from the next wall over. When she finally pressed her ear to the outlet near the bathroom floor, she said she heard breathing, slow, even, not loud, but close enough to fog the wall if it had been glass. She slept with the lights on, unplugged everything. She even shut off her main breaker the next night. But at exactly 3:44 a.m., her smoke alarm triggered, even with no power. She ran outside barefoot, heart racing. The street was empty. But when she turned around, she saw her front window glowing from inside. The fire began in the living room rug and spread outward in a perfect circle. Investigators found no sign of a spark, no plug, no source. The fire report listed thermal failure with no origin. But the woman told a different story. She said just before she opened the front door to escape, she saw a man standing in her hallway. His head was turned slightly, not toward her, toward the ceiling, like he was listening to something above them. Then the fire leapt from the walls like it had been waiting for permission. Later, forensic crews discovered something buried beneath the floorboards of her kitchen, a strip of melted metal wiring from an old toaster, shaped into a ring, not a full circle, just enough to suggest something was burned around. And the insulation underneath had not burned. It had curled, like paper pulled toward heat without flame. The official report was never released. But one firefighter told a journalist off record, it was like someone opened a door in the floor, and the heat came up to meet them. Another case in 2020 made headlines for its impossibility.